1. Mahāsīlava Jataka. Toil on, my brother. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a brother who had given up all earnest effort. Being asked by the master whether the report was true that he was a backslider, the brother said it was true. "How can you, brother," said the master, "grow cold in so exceptional a faith? Even when the wise and good of past days had lost their kingdom, yet so undaunted was their resolution that in the end they won back the power to govern." And so saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva came to life again as the child of the queen. And on his name day they gave him the name of Prince Goodness. At the age of 16 his education was complete. And later he came at his father's death to be king, and ruled his people righteously under the title of the Great King Goodness. At each of the 4 city gates he built an alms-giving place, another in the heart of the city, and yet another at his own palace gates, 6 in all. And at each he distributed alms to poor, homeless and the needy. He kept the commandments and observed the fast days. He had a lot of patience, loving kindness, and mercy. And in righteousness he ruled the land, cherishing all creatures alike with the fond love of a father for his baby boy. Now one of the king's ministers had dealt treacherously in the king's harem, and this became matter of common talk. The ministers reported it to the king. Examining into the matter himself, the king found the minister's guilt to be clear. So he sent for the culprit, and said, "O blinded by wrongdoing! You have sinned, and are not worthy to dwell in my kingdom. Take your substance and your wife and family, and go hence." Driven thus from the realm, that minister left the Kasi country, and, entering the service of the king of Kosala, gradually rose to be that monarch's confidential advisor. One day he said to the king of Kosala, "Sire, the kingdom of Benares is like a big honeycomb untainted by flies. Its king is feebleness itself. And a small force would suffice to conquer the whole country." On this, the king of Kosala thought that the kingdom of Benares was large. And, considering this in relation with the advice that a small force could conquer it, he grew suspicious that his advisor was a hired person bribed to lead him into a trap. "Traitor," he cried, "you are paid to say this." "Indeed I am not," answered the other. "I do but speak the truth. If you doubt me, send men to massacre a village over his border, and see whether, when they are caught and brought before him, the king does not let him off scot-free and even load them with gifts." He shows a very bold front in making his assertion, thought the king. I will test his advice without delay. And accordingly he sent some of his creatures to harass a village across the Benares border. The ruffians were captured and brought before the king of Benares, who asked them, saying, "My children, why have you killed my villagers?" "Because we could not make a living," said they. "Then why did you not come to me?" said the king. "See that you do not do the like again." And he gave them presents and sent him away. Back they went and told this to the king of Kosala. But this evidence was not enough to nerve him to the expedition. And a second band was sent to massacre another village, this time in the heart of the kingdom. These two were also sent away with presents by the king of Benares. But even this evidence was not deemed strong enough. And a third party was sent to plunder the very streets of Benares. And these, like their forerunners, were sent away with presents. Satisfied at last that the king of Benares was an entirely good king, the king of Kosala resolved to seize on his kingdom, and set out against him with troops and elephants. Now in these days, the king of Benares had 1,000 gallant warriors, who would face the charge even of a rut elephant, whom the launched thunderbolt of Indra could not terrify, a matchless band of invincible heroes ready at the king's command to reduce all India to his sway. These, hearing the king of Kosala was coming to take Benares, came to their sovereign with the news, and requested that they might be sent against the invader. "We will defeat and capture him, sire," said they, "before he can set foot over the border." "Not so, my children," said the king. "None shall suffer because of me. Let those who yearn to possess kingdoms seize mine, if they will." And he refused to allow him to march against the invader. Then the king of Kosala crossed the border and came to the middle country. And again the ministers went to the king with renewed request. But still the king refused. And now the king of Kosala appeared outside the city, and sent a message to the king asking him either yield up the kingdom or give battle. "I fight not," was the message of the king of Benares in reply. "Let him seize my kingdom." Yet a third time the king's ministers came to him and pleaded him not to allow the king of Kosala to enter, but to permit him to overthrow and capture him before the city. Still refusing, the king asked the city gates to be opened, and seated himself in state high up upon his royal throne with his 1,000 ministers round him. Entering the city and finding none to bar his way, the king of Kosala passed with his army to the royal palace. The doors stood open wide. And there on his gorgeous throne with his 1,000 ministers around him sat the great King Goodness in state. "Seize them all," cried the king of Kosala. "Tie their hands tightly behind their backs, and away with them to the cemetery. There dig holes and bury them alive up to the neck, so that they cannot move hand or foot. The jackals will come at night and give them sepulchre." At the asking of the ruffianly king, his followers bound the king of Benares and his ministers, and hauled them off. But even in this hour not so much as an angry thought did the great King Goodness harbor against the ruffians. And not a man among his ministers, even when they were being marched off in bonds, could disobey the king, so perfect is said to have been the discipline among his followers. So King Goodness and his ministers were led off and buried up to the neck in pits in the cemetery, the king in the middle and the others on either side of him. The ground was trampled in upon him, and there they were left. Still meek and free from anger against his oppressor, King Goodness encouraged his companions, saying, "Let your hearts be filled with nothing but love and charity, my children." Now at midnight, the jackals came trooping to the banquet of human flesh. And at sight of the beasts the king and his companions raised a mighty shout all together, frightening the jackals away. Halting, the pack looked back, and, seeing no one pursuing, again came forward. A second shout drove them away again, but only to return as before. But the third time, seeing that not a man amongst them all pursued, the jackals thought to themselves, "These must be men who are doomed to death." They came on boldly. Even when the shout was again being raised, they did not turn tail. On they came, each singling out his prey, the chief jackal making for the king, and the other jackals for his companions. Fertile in resource, the king noticed the beast's approach, and, raising his throat as if to receive the bite, fastened his teeth in the jackal's throat with a grip like a vice. Unable to free its throat from the mighty grip of the king's jaws, and fearing death, the jackal raised a great howl. At his cry of distress, the pack conceived that their leader must have been caught by a man. With no heart left to approach their own destined prey, away they all ran for their lives. Seeking to free itself from the king's teeth, the trapped jackal plunged madly to and fro, and by that loosened the earth above the king. On this the latter, letting the jackal go, put on his mighty strength, and by plunging from side to side got his hands free. Then, clutching the brink of the pit, he came up, and came on like a cloud speeding before the wind. Asking his companions of good cheer, he now set to work to loosen the earth round them and to get him out, till with all his ministers he stood free once more in the cemetery. Now it was by chance that a corpse had been exposed in that part of the cemetery which lay between the respective domains of two ogres. And the ogres were disputing over the division of the spoil. "We can't divide it ourselves," said they. "But this King Goodness is righteous. He will divide it for us. Let us go to him." So they dragged the corpse by the foot to the king, and said, "Sire, divide this man and give us each our share." "Certainly I will, my friends," said the king. "But, as I am dirty, I must bathe first." Straightway, by their magic power, the ogres brought to the king the scented water prepared for the usurper king's bath. And when the king had bathed, they brought him the robes which had been laid out for the usurper king to wear. When he had put these on, they brought his majesty a box containing the 4 kinds of scent. When he had perfumed himself, they brought flowers of many kinds laid out upon jeweled fans, in a casket of gold. When he had decorated himself with the flowers, the ogres asked whether they could be of any further service. And the king gave them to understand that he was hungry. So away went the ogres, and returned with rice flavored with all the choicest flavors, which had been prepared for the usurper king's table. And the king, now bathed and scented, dressed and clothed, ate of the elegant food. Upon that the ogres brought the usurper king's perfumed water for him to drink, in the usurper king's own golden bowl, not forgetting to bring the golden cup too. When the king had drunk and had washed his mouth and was washing his hands, they brought him fragrant betel nut to chew, and asked whether his majesty had any further commands. "Fetch me," said he, "by your magic power the sword of state which lies by the usurper king's pillow." And straightway the sword was brought to the king. Then the king took the corpse, and setting it upright, cut it in 2 down the backbone, giving 1/2 to each ogre. This done, the king washed the blade, and secured it on his side. Having eaten their fill, the ogres were glad of heart, and in their gratitude asked the king what more they could do for him. "Set me by your magic power," said he, "in the usurper king's chamber, and set each of my ministers back in his own house." "Certainly, sire," said the ogres. And then it was done. Now in that hour the usurper king was lying asleep on the royal bed in his chamber of state. And as he slept in all tranquility, the good king struck him with the flat of the sword upon the belly. Waking up in a fright, the usurper king saw by the lamplight that it was the great King Goodness. Summoning up all his courage, he rose from his couch and said, "Sire, it is night. A guard is set. The doors are barred. And none may enter. How then came you to my bedside, sword in hand and clad in robes of splendor?" Then the king told him in detail all the story of his escape. Then the usurper king's heart was moved within him, and he cried, "O king, I, though blessed with human nature, knew not your goodness. But knowledge of that was given to the fierce and cruel ogres, whose food is flesh and blood. From now on, I, sire, will not plot against such signal virtue as you possess." So saying, he swore an oath of friendship upon his sword and begged the king's forgiveness. And he made the king lie down upon the bed of state, while he stretched himself upon a little couch. On the next day at daybreak, when the sun had risen, his whole assemblage of every rank and degree was mustered by beat of drum at the usurper king's command. In their presence he praised King Goodness, as if raising the full moon on high in the heavens. And right before them all, he again asked the king's forgiveness and gave him back his kingdom, saying, "From now on, let it be my charge to deal with rebels. Rule you your kingdom, with me to keep watch and ward." And so saying, he passed sentence on the slanderous traitor, and with his troops and elephants went back to his own kingdom. Seated in majesty and splendor beneath a white canopy of power of governing upon a throne of gold with legs as of a gazelle, the great King Goodness looked at his own glory and thought thus within himself, "Had I not persisted in path, I should not be in the enjoyment of this magnificence, nor would my 1,000 ministers be still numbered among the living. It was by persistence in path that I recovered the royal state I had lost, and saved the lives of my 1,000 ministers. Truly, we should work hard unstoppingly with strong hearts, seeing that the fruit of persistence in path is so excellent." And with that the king broke into this heartfelt utterance. Toil on, my brother. Still in hope stand fast. Nor let your courage flag and tire. Myself I see, who, all my sufferings overpast, am master of my heart's desire. Thus spoke the bodhisattva in the fullness of his heart, stating how sure it is that the earnest effort of the good will come to maturity. After a life spent in right doing, he passed away to fare thereafter according to his deeds. His lesson ended, the master preached the Four Truths, at the close of which the backsliding brother won arhatship. The master explained the relation and identified the birth by saying, Devadatta was the traitor minister of those days, the Buddha's disciples were the 1,000 ministers, and I myself the great King Goodness. Jataka number 52. Kala Janaka Jataka. Toil on, my brother. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about another backsliding brother. All the incidents that are to be told here will be given in the Mahajanaka Jataka. The king, seated beneath the white canopy of power of governing, recited this stanza. Toil on, my brother. Still in hope stand fast. Faint not, nor tire, though harassed to pain. Myself I see, who, all my sufferings passed over, have fought my stubborn way ashore. Here too the backsliding brother won arhatship. The all-wise Buddha was King Janaka.